Hello learners, welcome to the course of MS 21 that is on the social processes and behavioral issues. We are discussing about organizational culture and our discussion of the session will revolve on understanding the relationship of culture to performance, and we'll move on to understand in terms of what are the expected role of a leader in shaping and reinforcing the culture. Also, we'll be discussing about the process of socialization, and therefore our discussion will move on in terms of understanding the different steps or different stages that is followed in organizational socialization. So let's begin with to understand in terms of what is the relationship of culture to performance. Learners, the effect of organizational culture actually is one of the hotly debated topic among organizational behaviorists and researchers. It seems that practitioners, they attest very strongly to the positive effects of culture to the organizations. And at the same time, it is also very, very difficult to quantify them. There are the theories, specifically John Cotter and James Heskett. They have reviewed certain theories. Precisely, there are three theories about the relationship between organizational culture and performance, and the evidence that they have brought out that was either supporting and refuting those theories. So the three theories that they were mentioning about it, they were about things like, there are three different perspectives. One of the first perspective is about the strong culture perspective. The strong culture perspective states that the organization who have a very strong culture, they perform better than other organizations. When you refer to a strong culture means it is an organizational culture which has a consensus on the value that they drive the company with an intensity that is actually being recognizable even to outsiders. Therefore, a culture is a very deeply held and a widely shared norm. Culture is also highly resistant to change. For example, if you refer a company like IBM, IBM's strong culture basically in the form of workforce loyalty. IBM, they emphasize about customer service. At the same time, they have a conservatism. So this is called as a very strong culture of IBM. Strong cultures are actually facilitate performance for varied reasons. One of the reasons is the strong culture is characterized by having a goal alignment. That means employees, they share a common goal. Another point is like culture that creates a very high degree of motivation. Because of the values that is shared by the members, they create a high degree of motivation to ensure that the organizational goals are met. Third, when a company adopts or company has a very strong culture that provides control without the oppressive effect of a bureaucracy. You can find out a strong corporate culture in a company, in an Indian company like Tata Company, Infosys, Bharat Petroleum Corporation, or any other public sector. You may find they have a very influential role, of the top management in HRM to ensure that the organization have a very strong value system with it, which is actually been impacting that the leaders of the organizations have actually adopted the certain processes that is followed in an organization. When we speak about the strong organization culture, this also refers in terms of certain questions. One of the question is, what can be said about evidence showing that strong economic performance can create a strong culture rather than the reverse of it? Second, what if the strong culture leads the firm down to the wrong path? So therefore, if we see this cultures variations, the strong culture itself, that depicts in terms of certain core values they follow, that they created within it. They find out, the people driving with an intensity which is very deeply held and being very widely shared. That is called as a strong cultural perspective. Second one is called as a fit perspective. The fit perspective learners, it argues that a culture is actually good when it fits the industry, when it fits the organization strategy. For example, a culture that values a traditional hierarchical structure, for example, stability would not so work well when you are leading into a manufacturing industry, computer manufacturing industry, okay, which is demanding for a very fast response or looking for a very lean and fast flat organization culture. Okay, there are several studies being carried out to understand the fit perspective. A study of some large US firms, that has indicated that culture consistent with the industry conditions basically helps its managers to take better decisions. It also indicates that culture need not change as long as industry does not change. If suppose the industry is going for a change, however, many culture changes too slowly to avoid a negative effect on the firm's performance. So when you are discussing about the fit perspective actually explains the short-term performance. You're not talking about the long-term performance. It is indicating that it is difficult to change the culture quickly, especially if the culture is widely being shared and if the culture is deeply held. So friends, this is about the fit perspective. Now the third theory is about the adaptive perspective, which talks about culture and performance actually that is adaptable. The theme of it says that the culture that helps an organization which adapts to the environmental changes are associated with excellent performance. Because when you're talking about an adaptive culture, actually this kind of culture that encourages the confidence, the risk taking among the employees. Okay, to test the adaptive perspective, the two organizational psychologists, Quater and Hoskett, what they did is they have interviewed a set of industry analysts, about say 20 odd firms, and they have brought out a contrast between adaptive culture and non-adaptive culture. They say the core values that they say that most managers, they care deeply when they are following an adaptive culture. Most managers, they deeply care about the customers, stockholders, employees. They also have a very strong value system for for having their policies in terms of people and processes that can create a useful change. Therefore, the common behavior that demonstrate is like they always pay close attention to their customers. Whatever the change required, they initiate the change. And they also try to serve the legitimate interest of the people. But whereas, in case of a non-adaptive organizational culture, you can see that most managers, they used to care about themselves or to their immediate work groups or some product associated with that work group. So they value actually the order and risk reducing management process much more highly than the leadership initiatives. Over here, managers tend to behave somewhat, in such kind of non-adaptive organizational culture. You can find out managers, they behave something very in an insulated form. They are more bureaucratic in nature. They are politically driven. As a result of it, we may not find much of change happening up. So this is the three perspectives that we discussed in terms of a strong cultural perspective, the fit perspective, and the adaptive perspective talks about the relationship of culture to performance. Now, when you refer in terms of how the leader basically shape and reinforce the culture, okay. So Edgar Skate, he's a man. He told that the leader basically they play a very crucial role in shaping and reinforcing the culture. And he suggested about some elements in managing the culture. He says about what exactly leaders need to pay attention, how leader need to react to crisis, how leader is supposed to behave, how leader allocates the reward, and how a leader actually hire and fire the individual. For example, number one, when leader paying an attention, what they need to do, they need to communicate their priorities, values, beliefs through the themes that is constantly been emerging from their focus. And those themes that need to be reflected in what they notice, what they comment, what they control. How leaders are reacting to the crisis is the second point. The way the leader is dealing with the crisis actually communicates a very powerful message about the culture. Emotions are heightened actually. You can see when there is a crisis, emotions are heightened during a crisis. And over that point of time, learning is intense. So difficult economic times, for example, the pandemic times, that creates crisis for many companies. And now that point of time, actually, how they demonstrate their values, that matters a lot. So some organization avoids at all cost for laying out their workers. Others, you find that they claim that employees are important, but quickly institute major layoff programs, the very first signal of something called as a downturn or kind of a pandemic. How leaders behave, that is the third one. Leaders need to behave in terms of modeling, role modeling. They need to be a good teacher, good mentor, good coach. They need to reinforce the value that supports the organization culture. Because your employees are watching, employees are emulating, employees basically emulate their leader's behavior. And they look to the leader to take some certain cues for adopting certain appropriate behavior. So many companies encourage their employees to be more entrepreneurial, using more initiative and invention. That is what the leaders used to demonstrate in those companies. So that's what they are actually gets influenced by it. How leaders allocate the reward, that also matters. To ensure that the values are accepted, leaders actually they need to reward the behavior of the people, which is very, very consistent with the values. Some companies, for example, they may claim that they are using a pay for performance system that distribute the rewards on the basis of performance. But when the time comes for a raise, however, the increased are awarded according to the length of the service of the company. Right? So imagine at that point of time, the feeling of a high performing, suppose say a newcomer who is from a millennial, who receives only a very tiny rise about, when they hear the company that the leaders espouse the value of rewarding the individual performance. For example, some of the companies value teamwork, they form cross-functional team, empower the team people to make certain important decisions. However, when say performance is appraised, the criteria for rating the people, what they do, they focus on individual performance. They believe in team, but they put up individual performance. So they are sending a very confusing signal to their employees about the culture of the company. Right? Therefore, learners, the question rises is individual performance value or is teamwork the key? That needs to be introspective. How leaders basically they hire and fire the individual. A powerful way that that leader actually reinforce the culture is through the selection of the newcomers to the organization. When you're living in a electronic age with the advent of the recruitment processes in an electronic mode, applicants' perception of organization culture that gets shaped by what the organization advertises on its recruitment website. Typically, we can see the perception shaping mechanisms are something like organizational values they follow, policies, awards, and goals. Leaders sometimes, often unconsciously, they look for individuals who are very similar to the current organizational members in terms of values and assumptions. Some of the companies, they actually hire individuals on a recommendation of a current employee. That's a referral program. This actually tend to perpetuate the culture because the new employee typically holds a similar values to the one they are referring to. The way a company also fires an employees and the rationale behind the firing also, friends, they communicate a message. So some company deal with the poor performers by trying to find a place within the organization where they come from, perform a better and make a contribution. So other companies, they seem to operate under the philosophy that those who cannot perform are being out quickly. So the reason for termination may not be directly communicated to other employees, but actually there happens to be a curiosity, and wherein the people who are working, they get into speculations. An employee who is displaying something an unethical behavior and is caught may simply be reprimanded, even though such behaviors are clearly against the organizational values. So other employees, what they do, they may view this as a failure to reinforce the value of an organization. So therefore, friends, what I'm trying to impress on is, the leader in an organization plays a very critical role in shaping and reinforcing the organizational culture. Managers, what they need to do over there is to create a positive culture through what they pay attention to, how they react to crisis, how they're behaving, the way the managers, they allocate the rewards, how they basically hire and fire the people. Because transformational leaders, they create an adaptive culture. Basically, an adaptive culture in turn actually increases the performance of a business. Okay. The next and the last final part of our discussion talks about socialization. Now, when you are discussing about leaders, we might see a lot of examples wherein the leaders, they have played a very vital role in shaping an organizational culture. But another process that again perpetuates the culture is the way whatever the leader emulates, the way it descends from one generation to the other generation of employees. Because newcomers, they learn the culture through a process which is called as an organizational socialization. The process wherein the newcomers, they are transformed from outsider to participate and to stand as a very effective member of the organization. So culture socialization that begins when you carefully select the newcomer who are likely to reinforce the organizational culture. So when one gets selected, the newcomer, what they do, they pass through the socialization process. So let's discuss about the different stages of socialization. The organizational socialization process actually is described as having 3 different stages. Okay, 3 different stages. One of the stages, the first stage is called anticipatory socialization. Second one is called encounter, and third one is called as a change and acquisition. Okay, this is describing something called as an outcome or the process which we have discussed till now in terms of how an organizational culture actually, get into the flow with the blood of into the organizational system itself. So let's discuss one by one about the socialization process on the different stages. The first stage is called as an anticipatory socialization, which happens to be the first stage. This encompasses all of the learning that takes place prior to when a newcomer lands onto a job. It is more in terms of understanding about what they expect. So some of the key concerns at this stage are called as, one is called as a realism and another one is called as a congruence. Realism means the degree to which a newcomer holds a realistic expectation about the job and organization. So one thing newcomers should receive information during entry into the organization is the culture. Information about values at this stage that helps the newcomer to begin to construct a scheme for interpreting the organizational experience. Therefore, a deeper understanding of the organization culture will be possible only through time and experience in the organization. There are two types of congruence between an individual and organization. Okay, when you are referring about congruence between the individual's ability and the demands, and the fit between the individual's values and the organizational values. Next stage is called as an encounter. There is a second stage of socialization. In the second stage of socialization, which we refer in terms of encounter, is when newcomer learns the task associated with the job, clarify what they are expected to do, and they start establishing the new relationship at work. And this particular stage commences on the very first day they land onto the job. Okay, and is thought to encompass actually the first, you can say, first 6 to 9 months on the new job itself. Newcomer face different kinds of job demands, like task demand that involves the actual work performed. The learning to perform the task is related to actually the organizational culture. So in some organization, in IT organizations present, when creativity is valued, newcomers are given considerable latitude to experience with the new ideas to their jobs. Similarly, role demands, involve the expectations that is placed on the newcomers. Newcomers actually, when they join in an organization, they may not exactly know what actually is expected of them, or they may be receiving something called as a conflicting expectations from other individuals. Conflicting expectations, friends, this is called as role conflict. The way the newcomer approach this demand depends in part on the culture of an organization. Because as newcomers are expected to operate with considerable uncertainty, or is the manager expected to clarify the new roles? Some cultures actually even put the newcomers through considerable amount of stress in the socialization process. Something like, in defense organizations, they used to have a humility-inducing experience. So newcomers will be more open to accepting the firm's values and norms. Long hours, tiring travel schedules, sometimes a lot of work overload. This is something called as a very important part of some socialization process. There is another demand which is called as an interpersonal demand. They arise from relationship at work, politics, leadership styles, group processes, group pressures. These are the interpersonal demand. And all these demands actually they reflect the values and assumptions that operate within the organization. So in the encounter stage, the expectations formed in an anticipatory socialization, they clash with the realities of the job, because it is the time of facing the task, role, and also the interpersonal demand of the new job. Okay. The third one in the second stage is called as the change and acquisition. In the third stage is called as change and acquisition stage, because this is the final stage of the socialization, change and acquisition. Because over here, new members, they start beginning to master the demand of the job. They started becoming proficient at managing the task. They started clarifying and negotiating the roles. They used to engage in relationships they maintain at their immediate work. The time when the socialization process is completed varies widely depending on the individual, depending on the job, depending on the organization. So the end of the process is signaled by the newcomer being considered by themselves and others as organizational outsiders. So this is all about the 3 stages of socialization. We spoke about the anticipatory socialization, which is in terms of realism and congruence, encounter in terms of job demand, task demand, role demand, interpersonal demand, and change and acquisition is the mastery. Okay. Now, when you come to what is the result of this socialization, that talks about the outcome of socialization. Newcomers who are successfully socialized, actually what they exhibit a good expected performance. They derive a high job satisfaction. They carry out a good intention to stay and continue with an organization. In addition to it, they also exhibit a low level of distress symptom, high level of organizational commitment, what I'm referring to, also sends a mark of successful socialization. Because this commitment is facilitated throughout the socialization process by the communication of the values that newcomers actually buy into. Successful socialization also signals something called as mutual influence, where the newcomer used to make adjustment with the job and the organization to accommodate their knowledge and personalities. Newcomers are also being expected to leave the marks in their organization. Okay, when socialization is effective, newcomers understand and they adopt to the organization values and norms, and that ensures that the company's culture, including its central values. So therefore, it provides employees a context actually for interpreting and responding to the things that happens at work. And it ensures also a very shared framework of understanding among the employees. So this is about how an organizational socialization process happens. But in this session, we spoke in terms of the relationship of culture and performance, wherein John Carter and James Haskett's, the review of the 3 theories, and those 3 theories are the strong cultural perspective, the fit perspective, and adaptive perspective we discussed. We spoke about the role of the leader, the way they actually promote in shaping and reinforcing the culture. Therefore, we talked about what the leader need to pay attention to, how leader actually reacts to the crisis, how a leader behaves, how a leader is allocating the rewards, and how a leader or what a leader should do to hire and fire its employees. And finally, we spoke about the organizational socialization with its different stages, and primarily about the 3 stages. And finally, we come to an understanding about what are the possible outcomes of a good socialization. We spoke in terms of raising the performance, raising the satisfaction index, the mutual influence between employers and employees, and the distress level going down, and the intention to remain in an organization going up is what we discussed in today's session. Thank you so much, friends.